Good day, my brothers and sisters. My theme for today is about prayer. Before I read today's scripture passage, I want to give you a little background. Darius was the king of the Medes, the nation that had conquered Babylon. Some of his leaders were jealous of Daniel and wanted to get rid of him. So they convinced the king to make a law requiring people to worship only the king. They knew Daniel prayed daily to his God and would be unwilling to follow such a decree. Since he was so faithful, they figured he would continue to pray in spite of the king's new decree. And they were right. Daniel 6, verse 10. Though Daniel knew about this new law, he went home and knelt down as usual in his upstairs bedroom, with its windows open toward Jerusalem, and prayed 3 times a day, just as he had always done, giving thanks to his God. Of course, those who had plotted to undermine Daniel discovered that he had been praying to his God and ran back to the king and reported Daniel's violation of the decree. And the king was obliged to throw Daniel to the lions. Studying this chapter explained it all in rather stark detail. God had sent his angels to protect Daniel because of his faithfulness in prayer and because of the holiness of his life. I've been thinking about prayer lately. I once heard that even though we often pray to get God to give us or someone else safety, comfort, food, or something else, prayer is also designed to change us. A good friend of mine says that every day he kneels down and prays. He offers himself to God and asks God to remove his bondage to self so that God's will be done that day. I always said to myself that I'm too old and my knees are not in good shape, so I don't have to kneel down. I said to myself that I can just sit down or lie down or even stand up and pray just as well. So, how should I pray? Should I pray like my friend prays? Now, prayer might not be an issue for you in your life. It probably isn't. I hate to say it, but prayer is somewhat of an issue for me. As a former Catholic, I was taught certain prayers to be said in a rote manner. The Our Father, as we called it, and the Hail Mary are 2 examples. But the word rote is very telling because it means routine, memorization, repetition, habit. That doesn't mean it is bad. It can give you a sense of comfort to be able to say a memorized prayer, and it is a way to lift yourself up into God's presence. But in my case at least, it was often not from the heart, but just from habit, without a lot of emotion or attention. So when I came to this church and I heard people praying spontaneously from the heart, I enjoyed it. But when I was asked by the pastor to pray at the end of the service one Sunday, I immediately felt somewhat self-conscious. It was something different for me, and I wasn't sure I could pray from the heart like I heard others doing. And even now, after being part of this church for a while, praying spontaneously out loud is still slightly uncomfortable for me, but I am learning and becoming more comfortable with it, and I'll keep on learning and actually starting to enjoy it some. after reading Daniel, I wanted to imitate him, since he was such a good prayer and a holy man. So I decided I needed to do some research on how to pray. Now, for most of you, this is probably no great revelation, but I got some new ideas from studying up on it. So these are some thoughts about how to pray. First of all, don't view prayer as a magic formula. We don't need to say exactly the right things in a certain position, just at the right time, or in a certain order. 1 John 5, verses 14 and 15 says, "And this is the confidence that we have toward him, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us." Pray without being anxious, and pray about everything. Pray with thankful hearts, and God will answer with the gift of his peace in our hearts. Pour out your hearts to God, being honest and open, keeping in mind that God cares for us and knows what is best for us. Express your love, gratitude, and worship to God without worrying about having just the right words to say. God is really more interested in the content of our hearts than the eloquence of our words. I suspect most of you know these things already, but maybe there is someone out there who is like me and needs a little help. If we use the Lord's Prayer as an example, the things that go into prayer would look something like this: worship, trust in God, making requests, confession, and submission. Here's another list of the different things that can go into prayer with a little memory trick to help remember. The memory trick is simply the word acts, A-C-T-S. Adoration, confession, thanksgiving, and supplication, or making a request. Acts, A-C-T-S. I have to remind myself that God's desire is for prayer to be a real and personal connection between himself and us. If these suggestions become a distraction for you, just forget them and pray from the heart. So back to Daniel. Remember, I said God protected Daniel because of his faithfulness in prayer and because of the holiness of his life. Well, I've come to love Daniel, and I think if I can follow some of the ideas I just described, if I can pray from the heart and pray often, I think I have a chance of being a better person and a good Christian. So my prayer for us today is that we will be faithful in prayer just as Daniel was.